Hi and welcome back to my channel. My name is Amy. Today we're going to be doing another politics lesson, and I wanted to talk about sort of an introduction to how Parliament works. Parliament being the legislative body in the UK, I wanted to kind of talk you through how it works, how it's made up, and kind of, yeah, just an introduction to Parliament, whether you're just starting your A-level or you just genuinely want to find out how it works. So let's go. So Parliament, when a bill is being passed, is split into three sections: the House of Commons, the House of Lords and the Monarch. The House of Commons is recognisable for its green benches and includes a completely elected membership of 650 members of Parliament, or MPs. An MP represents a constituency, which is a small area within the UK. It's kind of based on population, and these will deal with the local issues that come from their constituency as well as the local issues that affect the greater, so for example my constituency in Manchester, how it affects the rest of Manchester, but also on a national level and then an international level. As well as representing the beliefs of a constituency, an MP usually belongs to a party, and within the UK we have many parties. I couldn't name them all, but we have three main large parties, which is the Conservative Party, the Labour Party and SNP, which is the Scottish National Party, are the current three biggest parties. MPs must consider both the beliefs of their constituents in their local area as well as the beliefs of the party that they belong to. So MPs are bound by a whip system, meaning that they must abide by party lines in order to be favoured within the party, especially if there's some kind of promotional aspect. So if you want to move to a front bencher rather than a back bencher, if you please the party, then you're more likely to be put on the front bench. For example, if an MP constantly votes against their own party, they may be disregarded for ministerial roles or select committees that they can actually help shape legislation, whereas a backbencher, you're less likely to actually have hands-on involvement in the legislation. These MPs are elected via a first-past-the-post system rather than a proportional system. So basically, the person in that area with the majority vote wins the seat. It doesn't matter if that person wins by 70,000 votes or one vote, that person will get the seat and the other candidate will not be represented in Parliament. The party with the majority of the seats, after it's all been counted, wins the election after they pass the majority of 326 seats. However, this can differ if they don't reach the 326 seats. For example, in 2017, this was a snap election called by Theresa May in order to try and secure a better majority for her to pass her Brexit plan. Went really well. She only got 315 seats, and so she did not reach the majority. She had a hung parliament and she kind of had to like go to the Queen and beg. In 2011, the coalition between the Conservative Party and the Liberal Democrats pushed through the Fixed Term Parliaments Act, which made all elections in Parliament that should be held at the same time of the year each time, which is every 5 years. However, since this law was passed in 2011, there's only been one standard general election that's actually fit this kind of 5-year ruling, and two snap elections. So the first standard general election was 2015, which the Conservatives won, and the two snap elections was 2017, which was May's hung parliament, and 2019, which the Conservatives won under Boris Johnson. Because of this, the next actual election is not till 2024, given that no snap elections are called, whereas David Cameron's 2015 election, his term should have just ended in 2020. Unlike the US, the UK does not elect the executive, the Prime Minister and their cabinet separate from the legislative. Instead, the party members elect a leader without consulting the electorate directly, dependent on the party, leading us to question whether this practice has democratic legitimacy. In the Labour Party, if you are a Labour member, you are able to participate in the selection of the Labour leader. For example, Keir Starmer was elected this year, replacing Jeremy Corbyn, but in the Conservative Party, for example, it works differently. It's dependent on how the parties were formed and what their rules kind of are. But in terms of democratic legitimacy, it's when we look at a political institution, and to see how legitimate it is based on how much they have included the electorate, the people who elected them, to impact the decision. For example, referendums can be said to have democratic legitimacy as they directly ask the opinion of the electorate, given that the question is clear and people can answer in the way that they want to. The Prime Minister, although considered head of state, does not hold all the powers that other countries' leaders do. As we are a republican country, we have a monarch, we have a queen. She is Queen Elizabeth II. She is the technical head of state, even though she's kind of more of a rubber stamping exercise. She doesn't have any physical power that she would actually exercise. The Prime Minister does have royal prerogative powers, which were once powers that were royal, which were part of the monarchy when it had more power, and this allows the Prime Minister to declare war, make peace treaties with other countries, but this doesn't give them, for example Boris at the moment, it doesn't give him immunity from the law. He is still accountable to the law under the rule of law. The rule of law also considers parliamentary sovereignty, meaning that the House of Commons, House of Lords and monarch are sovereign to any other political dealings, so the Prime Minister, the Supreme Court, stuff like that. This places the decisions of Parliament as the elected, more the Commons, as the elected body above any kind of lawmaking entity in the UK. This includes any form of constitution, as unlike many other democracies such as the US, the UK has a uncodified constitution where many pieces of legislation contribute towards it rather than one dedicated document. This kind of other lawmaking entities not being above Parliament includes like referendums, although it's accepted that if the electorate have voted towards a certain answer in the referendum, for example the Leave campaign, they are expected to follow with this decision. They don't have to follow with this decision, it's not codified in law. Other examples include the Supreme Court. They were established in 2005 in the Constitutional Reform Act, and they, although have the power to declare something incompatible with the Human Rights Act, they do not have the power to strike down legislation. The House of Commons, as the dominant house, as the elected house, therefore has a lot of power in legislation, and a government with a huge majority can pass legislation very quick and easily. For example, Tony Blair's Labour government in the 1997 general election won a 179 seat majority over the Conservative Party following 18 years of Conservative rule under Margaret Thatcher and John Major. He was able to pass legislation quite quickly, including a lot of constitutional reforms. Moving on to the House of Lords, this is kind of something that's a bit more controversial, as it is not democratically elected. They cannot initiate legislation, they are simply a check on the House of Commons to make sure things are correct in terms of these people are often from a specialism. They can check legislation, as well as kind of just being a general check on democracy and making sure that the electorate's voices are kind of being followed. Instead of being elected, the House of Lords are appointed via an external committee. They're called the House of Lords Appointments Commission, and they are separate from the House of Commons. Existing Lords include those who have contributed to the work of stuff that has bettered the countries, for example economics, so Lord Sugar, Alan Sugar is a Lord. Art and theatre, for example Andrew Lloyd Webber, etc. The House of Lords is recognisable for its bright red sofas and the big gold throne that's in the middle of the House of Lords where the Queen sits, and it's the most ridiculous thing, but it's there for a reason. There are a couple of different type of peers that I wanted to touch on because the House of Lords has been reformed over the last few decades to kind of change the way it interacts with our democracy. The first example as the main kind of people that are involved in the House of Lords is life peers. These are people who are given out peerage because they've done something for the country. Like I said, like Lord Sugar, Andrew Lloyd Webber, there's people who are specialists in antisocial behaviour that are part of the House of Lords, so they can offer their specialism to try and impact legislation that the House of Commons tries to pass. There are also hereditary peers. This used to be a big commonly accepted thing, so say you were given a peerage, then you could pass it down to your son and your son's son, and etc, etc, and to the point that there were people in the House of Lords whose ancestors, people they'd never met, were given peerage, and these people were able to affect legislation even though they had kind of no stance. They had nothing to offer in terms of legislation. Hereditary peerage was abolished under Blair in the 1999 House of Lords Act, where this reduced the number of peerages down to just the ones who were left. So now there's about 90 peers still holding this title. When those peers die, their peerage is gone. They can't keep passing it down. The House of Lords is considered very controversial within the country, even though it's something that's the country was kind of founded on. It's something that our democracy has had for centuries. It's unelected. Peers are given peerage for life rather than For example, the MPs are only given 5 years or when they're re-elected. And also there is a huge Christian bias within the chamber, especially considered that the UK considers one of its national values as being a multicultural nation. This Christian bias of lots of bishops in the House of Lords seems very out of place. The undemocratic nature of the chamber leads many to question how much involvement these unelected officials should have in legislation, as they are not direct representatives of the electorate. This includes the Queen, as although she isn't a lord, she is unelected. She is part of a system where it's hereditary, and it's not based on being the best candidate or anything like the House of Commons is. In 2006, Parliament was hit with the Cash for Honours scandal, where a loophole in legislation allowed wealthy donors who wanted political power to avoid proper declaration. Therefore, there were several men, just random people, who were nominated as life peers were later revealed to have donated large sums of money to the Labour Party, and that they didn't actually have any specialism. They kind of bribed their way in, and it was very undemocratic. The final section of the 3 sectors is the monarch. I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail on because she isn't very relevant to how legislation is passed. She's kind of more of a rubber stamping exercise. Our current monarch is Queen Elizabeth II. She has been queen since 1952. Overall, the Queen has very little involvement in the legislative process compared to the powers the monarchy once had and are kind of dedicated to within the different houses. One of the Queen's responsibilities in democracy is the Queen will welcome the new government following an election with a speech and welcomes them as the new governing body. The Queen also signs off on every piece of legislation before it becomes into use, and this is more considered, as I said, more of a rubber stamping exercise. This is more kind of just to secure the kind of tradition of the Queen, which brings up in a lot of tourism, when she wouldn't actually say, no, you can't pass this legislation, but she does have the power to. That's kind of it. In terms of the Queen, she is very unimportant in terms of how a bill's passed and how democracy is used within the different houses. She doesn't sit in the Lords very often. So that's kind of it. That's kind of my roundup of Parliament. Thank you for watching. I hope you have learnt something, and I wanted to say I've made this video with closed captions, and I'm starting to do that on a lot of my different educational videos, as I'm aware people taking politics as a GCSE and A-level, or just generally wanting to know, might not always be able to access the information, and I want to make my content as readily available as possible. So the videos do have closed captions on. You can trust them. I have spent hours writing them myself. I promise they're all right. And yeah, thank you for watching. I will see you again soon. Bye!